be posted on social media. Okay, so that link will be posted on social media and it'll be uploaded to the Chamber's YouTube page. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, you can drop them in the chat, the Zoom chat, and we'll do our best to review them all at the end. Just please remember to stay muted for the duration of the presentation, so that'll eliminate all the background noise. Please keep all the comments in the chat professional. We're going to do our best to stay within the time allotted, our hour and a half, and that'll include time for questions. So without further ado, Frank, let me know when you're ready.
Okay. Okay, when Zachary and I met for this topic, we quickly decided we were at different points in life. So we thought we would put this together in a little bit of a playful way, talking about personal finance like a journey through life. So next slide, please, Laura. So for myself, if you can't tell from looking at both of us, I'm near the end of the journey and Zachary's closer to the beginning. So that's the different perspectives we have, and of course personal finance has a different perspective depending on where you're at on this journey. And so I'll be speaking to the broader view from the near the end of the journey, hopefully not too close to the end, and Zachary more from the midpoint. And a lot of the people here will be, more at the beginning part of this whole thing. So with that, a little background on myself for the sake of this journey. You start to change perspective as you get older on things, and you start to look at what are the things that are really important and so forth. And my history is I started out as a mechanical engineer, then became an engineering manager, then a director of operations, then I was COO for a company, and then I retired early, and then I started a business and a corporation and ran that for 10 years, sold the business, and then officially retired. But I made a transition. During my working career, I worked with the intention that I would have a give back phase. And that was part of my long-term plan. And for those folks that know me, I'm pretty much a long-term planner. And so I had this in mind that what I wanted to do was live my working career and then flip-flop and then create a give back phase. And I did that beginning at age 54. I retired from the corporate world, started this company, and then did some other things and continue to do some other things now. Working with the community I'm on a couple boards, and I run this branch of SCORE, which helps out small businesses. I'm involved with scholarship committees and finance committees for Bridge Builders Foundation, and I was involved in a lot of other things, and I'm starting to taper those things down now. So this is the perspective I bring to this presentation. So next slide, please, Laura. Next slide, please. Okay. So when you start out life's journey, you really don't know where you're going, and a lot of times you don't know what's up or down or left or right, and you have to learn a lot about life, and personal finance is not one of those things that's a really big deal when you start. It becomes a much bigger deal as you get older. So you have to learn the large lessons in life, and when you do into the personal finance part, let's go back to just life in general. And next slide, please. And when you've been around a while and you had a little time to reflect on this, you start asking yourself the questions: what are the most important things to know to be successful in life? And everyone has their own definition of what's a success. But I have this one with a couple different elements, and then it'll ultimately fold into the why the finance piece enters into this. So next slide, please. So to me, to be a success in life is giving more of yourself than you take from others. if you've lived this life and you've lived large, as long as you've given a little more than you've taken, you've been successful. You've left a legacy here. You've done something. You know, you've been remembered for what you do. Now, the next slide. Spending less on yourself than you have. And this will be one of the things that Zach will talk about in a lot of details, but when you build up your skill sets and your abilities, and you have the ability to spend, as long as you're spending less than you have, the reserve that you create is things that you can do to live life later on without income, or to give back to other people, that sort of thing. Now, next slide, please. And living with intention and not by reaction. And this was one of the things that I felt as I sort of evolved to become a leader. A lot of times when you start out, you're reacting to things. Somebody says, get this done by this date. If you're a little kid, it's like, you know, you're told when to eat, what to do, and so forth. But as you mature, living by intention means that you've made a long-term decision of how you're going to live your life, and you're not just reacting to what's in front of you or what happens on the news today or whatever. And to me, this is what really separates the leaders from those that don't lead. And that's in particular why I've spoken to a couple of the leadership groups that have come through, and I wanted to speak to the Flex group about this topic because you folks are the leaders of this community, and I plan to be around here for the balance of my time. So I want to try to at least present some ideas from this side of it. Next slide, please. So then why is personal finance important? Where it folds in, if you look at life from that perspective of giving more than you take, you have to know where you're at and where you're going to be, and what you have to give back. And that's where personal finance comes in. And people speak badly about money, but money in personal finance first is really just the understanding and management of money. And money isn't a bad thing. It's a measure of life's potential energy. That's all it is. There's a lot of things people can say about it. It's evil, it's good, it can get things done, it can be a curse and that sort of thing. But being an engineer, potential energy is, what that means is it's like a battery, for example, a fully charged battery. And this battery you can use to power a car, you can use to raise water up, you can use it to turn lights on, you can do all sorts of good things with it. You can also electrocute yourself, kill somebody, and that sort of thing. So money is a lot like that. It's life's potential energy. And if you go to the next slide, please. This is Ayn Rand. She was sort of the ultimate capitalist in the early 1900s, wrote a couple big books, Atlas Shrugged, and a couple of these others back in that era. And she said that money is only a tool. It'll take you wherever you wish, but it will never replace you as the driver. And it's true, because you can have all sorts of money and not be happy. But you have to, if it goes back to this living with intention, you have to know where you're going and what you're trying to accomplish. And living a self-serving life, if you've lived long enough to see things, is not necessarily an enjoyable life. I think you get a lot more out when you give a lot more back. So next slide, please. So where does money come into all this? It's the universal tool to trade life's energy with other people. And when you accumulate money, that's that potential energy. When you spend the money, it's kinetic energy. That's the use of money. And when you're living your life, when you're early in your career, so much of it is in and out. It's that kinetic energy of moving money in and out, and you don't have any savings and that sort of thing, because you're making the money move, making this life's energy move. So next slide, please. So what does it trade? It can trade for land, labor, natural resources, or finished goods. And this really sort of covers the gamut, because people can barter, people can trade off their own resources, people can help each other, but money is simply a universal tool to be able to trade with other people, trading your life's energy that you've put in and created to get someone else's life energy that they created, either through resources, land, labor, or whatever. So that's where money comes into play in all of this. Next slide. So you will need to use money throughout your life, and that's where personal finance becomes important. You have to know the movement of this energy. Early in my working career, I was a technical geek kind of person, and I really was not at all interested in finance until I was interested in management. And then I realized that finance was the language of management. It was understanding, to be able to understand the accountants and finance people and money moving in and out of things. If you don't know how to speak that language and know how it works, you really are like a foreigner in a foreign land. So next, please. Next slide. So when you need money throughout your life while you're working, you need money to pay for your expenses and save for retirement. But here's what happens. It flips. When you become retired, you have to have accumulated enough to live independently without an income. And that's really the thing. Early on, you don't think about this stuff, but it doesn't take much while you're doing it, while you're living through your working career. But if you wait too late in the game, then you're playing catch up. You're not building up enough potential energy to live independently. And that living independently can be more than just keeping yourself alive and food on the table. If you have these ideas of living a life where you're giving back to other people, it's the reserve you've created that you can give back that you don't need for yourself. And that's really the true joy of this type of thing. Next slide, please. So what are the most important things to know financially to be successful in life? Taking these broader pictures down. And if you first understand that money is a resource that you shouldn't waste, it's life's energy. And I found myself, even like when you're younger, I'll tell you a personal story about myself early on that I think is kind of funny now, and that really made me realize early in my life, what the heck am I doing with money? I was making a fair amount of money, and I was an engineering manager for a large corporation, and I got an award, and it was a little bit of money, and so I always wanted to get a Rolex watch. I bought a Rolex watch, and I thought, oh man, and I got this thing, and then I looked at it and said, this is really nice, but man, did I spend a lot of money for this? And at the time I was doing triathlons. So I bought a Timex triathlon, and I bought this Timex triathlon. Back in that day, they were $19. And I looked at this $19 watch. It could do all these different things. It could time different events. It could do lap timing, countdown. It was an alarm and so forth. And I spent $19 for it. I spent over a couple $1,000 for this other watch, and all it could do is tell the time and give me the date. And I thought, what the heck am I doing? And that was the wake-up call for me to realize what am I doing with money is really kind of wasteful. So the next slide, please. So it really led me to the question, asking yourself, and this is really important if you look at it over the long haul, asking yourself, how much is enough for me? When I realized that $19 Timex triathlon watch did a lot more for me than the Rolex watch, I realized, why do I even need something like this? I was sort of caught in that success trap, and and I think for everybody, it's a personal choice. So next slide, please. So if you live where you live for immediate satisfaction and you get things, you can become an accumulator, like you see here. If you see something you really like, you buy it. And next slide, please. And if you see a lot of things, you just keep buying things. And the lesson I learned on this is when you start to accumulate stuff and then you move like half a dozen times like I did in my life, and you're moving all this junk around from place to place and never opening a box, and then you start to say, I have too much stuff. It's crazy, you know, but it takes you a long time to realize what you're getting caught up in. And that's really, you can, until you get to the point where you start rationalizing with yourself, what do I have in all this extra stuff? If I have too much of it, maybe I could give it to somebody else that could use it. Then things start to change for you. So next slide, please. So when you get into this whole mode of understanding that money's a resource you shouldn't waste, then it becomes something you should probably measure. And how do you measure where you're at and where you should be? And that's where this becomes a pretty important thing. And there are a couple things you can do, even if you did something just rudimentary. These two things will really help you out a lot. The first is developing an annual budget and tracking it monthly. And what this does for you is it shows you that this kinetic energy of money that I've talked about, what you're taking in and what you're giving out, you want to at least balance that so you're not spending more than you're actually making. Because if you're doing that, you're never building up a reserve. And so that's why it becomes important to build an annual budget and track it monthly, just to know where your expenses are going. And it may take you a little bit to do it, but it's not a very difficult exercise, and you know anyone can give you a hand with that. So next slide, please. And calculate your net worth annually, I think, is a really important thing. This lets you know what your potential energy is, that money potential that you have. And I'll show you in the next slide, please. This is just a simple example of net worth. It's what assets are what you own, liabilities are what you owe, and the net worth is the difference between the two. It's your assets minus your liability, and it's your net worth. So basically, this is a simple measure of if everything I owe, everything I owned, and I paid off all of my debt, what would I have left over for the rest of my life? And in this case, I'm showing here $95,000. And you oftentimes in this, you know, you have home mortgages, you have all kinds of things. But what you want to do is, as time goes on, what's really important is measuring your net worth and making sure you're making positive progress as the years go on. And that's a really important calculation to have, because you don't know where you're at until you keep score in the game. And that's the simplest measure of keeping score on yourself. Next slide, please. The other really important thing to know financially is investing in yourself as early as you can. And this is one of those things where if you have a budget, you want to take some of your money and put it into investing in your own future. And I'll show you an example in the next slide, please. This is a little busy, but the takeaway on this is that if you look at the blue graph, the one that shows on the right, the ending portfolio is 1.87 million. What that person did, they invested from 25 to 65 and invested $10,000 a year. This is just showing different ways to do this. And so this person, this is like a max investment. They invested $400,000 over the course of their working career and ended up with $1.87 million at age 65. Now, the real secret of this is you can invest early, but not invest nearly as much. And if you look at, on that same chart, there's a person named Noah, and he's listed in green. He saves from ages 25 to 65 and earns only 2.25%. He saved as much money, but he didn't invest at a rate that would earn him a higher earning. It was very conservative. So he only earned $652,000. If you look at the one above that, it says Quincy. This person only invested for 10 years, only invested $100,000. And he invested it at 6.5% interest. And what happened on that's a gray chart, he earned $950,000. The takeaway on this is if you invest early, you don't have to invest as much to end up with a nice nest egg at the end. It's like in that particular case, he invested $100,000 at 6.5%, and the other person invested $400,000 at 2.25%. I have a personal friend that during the last financial crisis, he got freaked out and didn't want to invest anything in the stock market or anything with any risk. And so he basically put his money in a mattress, if you want to think of it. He just put simple, he didn't even invest in bonds. He didn't invest, he just passbook savings on the savings account. He was earning 2% or less for his career. He's now in his mid to late 40s. He has over $600,000 saved. He's a real saver, big time saver. But of the $600,000 saved, he's only earned $50,000 of interest. So he's had to do this all on his own, and it's all of his own savings. So the point here is that you have to, especially when you're younger and can take a little bit of risk, it's important to invest in something that'll get a higher yield, and then you can take the ups and downs of a stock market and that sort of thing, and survive. When you reach my point, you have to become more conservative because you're at a point where you're just protecting what you have. I mean, we could spend a lot of time on this, but the key takeaway on this is that starting early and investing with a little bit of a higher risk is a really important thing to do. So next slide, please. This is probably, maybe to me, the most important thing financially is learning delayed gratification. And what I mean by that is if you do things like, no matter whether it's, let's take a simple example like dieting. It's easy to see, I love sweets, so it's easy for me to go to Dairy Queen and get a Blizzard. But if I want to lose weight, I'm not going to eat a Blizzard every night and lose any weight at all. So the delayed gratification is that if I want to lose weight, I have to stick to a plan. The delayed gratification is more important than the absolutely tasteful Blizzard that I would love to have. So it's learning that lesson that's a really important one, and it's especially important financially. Next slide, please. Next, oh, okay. And this is a quote that I thought was pretty powerful. Rich people stay rich by living like they're broke, and broke people stay broke by living like they're rich. And you know what I'm saying here is you always want to live below your means, and that way you'll have a reserve that you've built up over time. Next slide, please. So learning delayed gratification involves a couple things. Zach, I'm not going to steal away Zach's thunder because he does a really excellent job of this. But basically, financially, delayed gratification means paying your debt off first, paying yourself second, and rewarding yourself third. And these are very, very important lessons to learn. And like I said, Zach will really be getting into this, and he has a really powerful story to tell. And next slide, please. So I go back to this other thing, living with intention and not by reaction. This is that one of those really important life lessons that I wanted to repeat again at the end, because I feel it's a really important one. Next slide, please. So when we look at life like a journey, you're early on in the process, and along the way, if you can talk to people that have either been on the journey, your journey is absolutely going to be different than mine was. But there are certain things that people have learned, and having mentors and people that can tell you what was good and what was bad and what they learned, you'll find it really valuable. And I hope maybe I put one or two little things in your backpack to help you on the journey. With that, I'll turn it over to Zach to take it the rest of the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. That was great. So my name is Zach Embry. I'm a branch manager for Farmers National Bank of Emlenton at the Knox branch. And I wanted to get a little bit more of the goals and ideas as far as more how to business, and along the way, I amassed a massive amount of debt. I really use that excessively, and in October 2017, I had accumulated $530,000 of initiative.
We can't.
Okay, so I'll continue. In October of 2017, I had accumulated $530,000. I really didn't have a solid logical way of being able to pay that back in a reasonable amount of time.
Hey, Zach.
Yes.
You are sounding really scratchy to me, and at least me and Laura. Oh yeah, I see in the chat. It sounds like you're a little scratchy to everyone. I think maybe if you turn your video off and we can just listen to your audio, that might help. So if we want to try that for a couple minutes.
Should I start over?
Probably. Sorry.
Yeah,
I
that's
was
fine.
texting to see if anyone else was having issues, but yeah, now you sound good. So let's try it like this and we'll let you know.
Yeah, let's start over.
Okay.
Okay, so I introduced myself, but I wanted to share a little bit of background in my story. I graduated and immediately followed my operations, my struggle to start a business myself, and I started a manufacturing business and a construction business and a recycling business, and all along the way, I continually gathered debt, a massive amount of debt. For 2017, I had $530,000 of debt to my name, and I really didn't have a solid, logical plan, reasonable expectation of being able to pay that back in a reasonable time. So that's where my journey really started, and I started trying to figure out, how do you do this thing called personal finance? So today, I'm still working with that debt. I have $63,000 2 years. So I'm very excited about that and moving forward through my plan and starting to invest and build wealth and save for a rainy day. So I wanted to share with you a startling fact. 80% of Americans would not be able to cover a 1,000. Are you guys able to hear me? Frank, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yeah, right now you sound good, but it keeps getting scratchy.
You guys want me to call in?
Yeah, I think that might be our next option. Sorry, I don't know why it's doing that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, because when we tested it, I think I was being heard, but
Yeah.
You're
Yeah,
good
it just
now.
gets like really scrambled every couple minutes. If you want to take a minute and call in with the link, then we'll mute your video here.
okay.
Your meeting ID followed by pound.
There we
Well, Zach is calling in. Does anyone have any questions that maybe I could answer?
Yeah, Frank, I think I have a question that maybe you could have some input on. Do you know, does SCORE have any insight or anybody that gives advice for student loans?
You say for student loans?
Yeah, like I personally have my I guess like subsidized and unsubsidized student loans, and then I have a couple private loans that I had to get, and just like trying to figure out the best track of how to pay those off. You know, there's so many different options. Does SCORE have any kind of any person that gives any financial advice on how to tackle those?
Well, you know, we do this kind of thing for small businesses, but in the spirit of that, the problem is no different than for an individual as it is for a business. And so I could see, I know it's not within the theoretical charter of SCORE, but if let's say you went in with the idea that you're thinking of starting a business and you want to work through all your debt to be able to do it, you could probably request SCORE counseling, would be my suggestion. You know, that'd be one way to do it.
Yeah.
And because I don't see where I mean, it's a little different than what SCORE has in mind for us to do as counselors, but there again, I'm kind of looking at, you know, if you can help somebody and help them progress, that's really the most important thing. And oftentimes it's, I see with so many businesses, it's finances is the biggest hurdle. Most of them know what to do technically and so forth, but financially, a lot of people just don't have the experience or insight into what to do. So I would say, you know, if you want to try doing that, request SCORE counseling at score.org. And then what you could do is I would tailor it by just saying, you know, you're a young professional thinking of starting a business at some point in time and would like to speak to somebody about this.
Well, that sounds great. Yeah, I'll definitely look into that. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Is Zach back yet?
Hopefully. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
I can. Do you want me to stay on muted, Zach, and let you know if you're going bad on the voice?
Well, I can see you, Frank. If you want to just wave your hands in the air, if I'm
Okay, I'll go. If it's not working out, I'll do thumbs down.
that's perfect. That's
Okay,
perfect.
good enough. I'll mute myself.
I'm gonna start over. Basically, my name is Zach Embry, and I work at Farmers National Bank. I'm a branch manager for them. But I just wanted to share you a little bit about my story. After graduating from college at the Citadel in 2012, I started a few different businesses, a scrapyard and a construction business and a pallet manufacturing business. And along the way, I amassed a lot of debt. October of 2017, I had amassed $530,000 of debt, and I really didn't have a solid plan, a reasonable expectation of being able to pay that off in any reasonable amount of time. So I started looking for a plan and looking for a way to get this area of my life together. So I've been working a plan for 2 years now, and currently, as of today, I have $63,000 of debt, and I'm on track to get out of debt. I'll be completely out of debt within 2 years. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about my story. So a startling statistic is that 80% of Americans would not be able to cover a $1,000 emergency without using debt. And I would definitely have been counted in that 80% just a few years ago. So, and a quote that I feel is very, very pertinent is that most people don't plan to fail, but they fail to plan. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Laura, next slide, please. So here's the plan. The 80-20 rule is basically that 20% of your activities will account for 80% of your results. And when it comes to personal finance, it's pretty simple stuff. It's about 20% head knowledge. But the hard part is the 80% behavioral change and modification and sticking to that budget, sticking to that plan, and maintaining that intentional lifestyle over the long term. So when I said the budget, I'm sure some of you cringed. And, the budget is not a bad word. The budget is just another name for a plan. It's you deciding what to do with your money on paper, on purpose, before the month begins. It's being intentional with making a decision consciously of what you're going to do with your money before it's all gone. And so that you aren't, thank God it's Friday, oh God, it's Monday. You aren't one of those people where there's just too much month at the end of the money. You guys have, I'm sure, have heard those expressions. So a key to remember when you're putting together a plan, the budget, is to establish what is a need and what is a want. So living on less than you make and saving for a rainy day, that's essential. And I'm going to talk more about them as we go through my presentation, but Dave Ramsey is a financial guru that I follow, but there's lots of them out there. Susie Orman, there's a laundry list of them out there, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can make up your own plan. But when it comes to saving for a rainy day, there's an exchange in one of Dave's broadcasts where he says you have to save for a rainy day. And someone speaking to him says, "Oh, Dave, don't be so negative." And Dave's response is, "I'm positive it's gonna rain." So saving for a rainy day, that's a big part of having financial freedom and a solid financial plan. Next slide, please, Laura. So the tortoise and the hare. Frank alluded to this a lot through his presentation, just having a long-term view and a long-term plan. So Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare, I'll summarize it quickly, give you Zach's version of it. Basically, there is a hare and there is a tortoise, and they're challenged to a race. The hare is significantly faster than the tortoise, but is easily distracted. Meanwhile, the tortoise is very slow and methodical, but very intentional, focused on that finish line, persistent, and is just really focused on that finish line. So what ends up happening is the hare is distracted and ends up taking a nap, and the tortoise actually wins the race. So having a plan and being intentional about managing this aspect of your life is key to winning the race. Next slide, please. And it's important to have the right amount of insurance coverages in place. Insurance equals defense. If you save up $1 million, but don't have the right amount of auto insurance, and you're in a bad wreck and you're found liable, that $1 million is going to go away very quickly. So having the right coverages in place to protect your assets and to protect you and to keep you focused on your long-term goals, it's really important. So you want to be aware of gimmick plans out there. You can probably insure your neighbor's cat, but you really shouldn't. You want to have a handful of areas covered for sure. That's homeowners and renters insurance, auto insurance, health insurance, disability, long-term care once you're over 60 years old, identity theft, and life insurance. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go through the 7 steps of Dave Ramsey's baby steps, just to give you an example of what a holistic financial plan for the long term could look like for you. So baby step 1 in the plan that I follow is the starter emergency fund. So in addition to having established a written budget and having those insurance coverages in place, you put together $1,000 and you earmark it for an emergency. You set that aside, and basically the goal here is to separate you from needing to use your credit card for an unexpected event, like a car tire blows out, your refrigerator dies all of a sudden. Those would be real emergencies that $1,000 could help. That's for something that's not in your budget and it's unexpected. It's not something you can really plan for necessarily. And a big thing here is defining what is an emergency. You know, the pizza man showing up at the door, that is not an emergency. But you know, having that refrigerator die all of a sudden, or having a hefty car repair bill out of the blue, then you need it to get to work, that would qualify for sure. So let's go to the next slide, please. So once you have that $1,000 set aside, you're ready to move on to baby step 2, which is the debt snowball. This is where you list your debts, smallest to largest, regardless of the interest rate, and you make minimum payments on everything but the smallest debt. And you attack that smallest debt with a vengeance. The goal here is to simplify your situation and to get rid of some of those mosquitoes, that $100 Kohl's credit card that's been sitting there forever. Get those out of the way. Get those small tasks off your to-do list so that you can really focus on those larger debts and get those paid back, so that you can then have more control over your expendable income and make better decisions with it, like saving, like investing, and planning for larger purchases and that sort of a thing. So next slide, please. Baby step 3 is a fully funded emergency fund. That's 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside as a fully funded emergency fund. The key here is that it's liquid. This is you self-insuring through a pretty serious emergency that wouldn't be covered in an insurance policy. But this would also allow you to increase those deductibles so that you can save some money on your insurances. And then it's also, again, very important to establish what is a true emergency. You know, a fire, a bad accident, a medical issue, those would definitely qualify off the top of my head. Let's go to the next slide, please. So once you have completed baby step 1, 2, and 3, you're going to do steps 4, 5, and 6 simultaneously. Step 4 is investing 15% of your income into tax-advantaged retirement plans. Step 5 is saving for kids' college, and step 6 is paying off the mortgage early. So in step 4, you're investing 15% into 401ks, IRAs, Roth IRAs, and the key here is that you never invest in something that you don't understand. And the sooner you get to this step, the better. As Frank had talked about, the power of compound interest working for you instead of against you is extremely powerful, and you'll see exponential gains. Next slide, please. Step 5 is kids' college. I just think it's really important to remember that you can go to college without massive student loans. You can plan ahead, especially if you're going to be helping your children through college. There's scholarships. There's what school you go to, and picking an in-state school and maybe going to community college for the first 2 years is very important. There's a lot of resources out there. If you're a parent and you're trying to, if you're anything like me who ended up with a good bit of student loans and you don't want that for your kids, this could be a important step for you, making that decision ahead of time of how much you want to contribute and how you want to contribute in trying to alleviate some of that burden for your kids. Next slide, please. Baby step 6, pay off the mortgage early. So everything above the 15% of expendable income at this, that you would be investing that 15%, everything above that, you want to throw at that mortgage and get it paid off early. Back to that conversation of compound interest and time versus interest. The longer that loan is that you're in, it's an exponential amount of more interest that you'll pay over the life of that loan. If you look at a 15-year mortgage side by side with a 30-year mortgage, it's not double the amount of interest. It's an exponential difference in the amount of interest that you're going to pay. And it's not a significant amount of difference in the monthly payment. Most of the time, it's just a few $100s. Next slide, please. Finally, baby step 7 is now you have the mortgage out of your way. You're going to ramp up that 15% being invested to max out those tax advantage plans and do some investing on your own outside of those plans. At this point, you have unleashed your greatest wealth building tool, your income. You've put yourself in a situation where you can invest significant portions of your income and be outrageously generous with the wealth you have built. You live like no one else so that later you can live and give like no one else. Now, those last 7 slides, that's really Dave Ramsey's plan. I've just tried to boil it down to a digestible few slides for this quick presentation, but that would normally be covered in a 9-week intensive course. So we can go to the next slide. Well, actually, let's stay on that slide for one moment. So just imagine for a moment, you've worked through all these steps. You have built this nice nest egg. Just imagine the good that you could do with that money, with that wealth that you have accumulated. If you were to see a need in a friend and a stranger, a family member, see a true need, you would be able to speak into that need and take care of it. A friend who's having hard times, their vehicle dies, you would be able to easily speak into that, purchase them a vehicle, even just outrageous wealth that you would be able to do without hurting your lifestyle, without hurting your financial well-being. I look forward to getting to that step for sure. Next slide, please. So that's the end of my presentation. Now some time for question for Q&A with Frank and I. Feel free to address it to both of us or just Frank or just me. But I'm kind of curious, where are you guys in the process? What are your financial dreams? And, where do you begin?
Thanks,
So we
Zach.
do have a, oh, sorry, go for it, Kat. Sorry.
Okay. No, I was just gonna say that. Thanks, Zach and Frank. I know for me, I'm a little bit on the higher end of the age group of the young professionals, and I've got a mortgage, and so that's great advice, Zach. You know, just to start really trying to pay that down, and that's kind of the step I'm at right now. So that's good motivation. I'm just thinking, like, can I log on and make a payment on that? So I'm going to be doing that after this. But Laura, were you about to read the question in the
Yeah, there
chat?
was a comment from Juliet. What is your advice for a young person who is invested in an IRA and gets nervous when they lose some of their investment because of the downturn in the market, such as COVID? This is very relatable because this is actually, you know, something that a lot of us are going through.
I have a very short answer to that. The only person that gets hurt on a roller coaster is the guy who jumps off. And
You know,
I'll let Frank give the more in-depth answer.
I can answer that one because, you know, I'm at a point where we're just on fixed income in our investments. And when you have a downturn like this, there are other financial tools you get to the point where you make sure it's not so bad for you. But I would say here's the one thing, like during this last downturn, keep in mind that when the market went down, for every seller, there's a buyer. The market doesn't move unless somebody's buying. So if you're selling on the way down, somebody's buying on the way up. And I've been through, personally, let's see, the 1987 Black Thursday crisis. I've been through the dot-com crisis. I've been through the 2008 and 9 crisis, and now the COVID crisis. So in my so-called investing life, I've been through 4 of these cycles. And what I found is that it's really hard to stay in, but when you stay in, if you're invested broadly, not like in an individual stock, but like in an exchange traded fund or something that tracks the market, over the long run, over the real long run, the stock market moves up at a rate of about 8 to 9% a year. I mean, it'll go down 20 and up 20 and this and that, but over the longer run, it climbs at around 8 or 9%. And I've seen this happen over and over again in these cycles. And if you get out during the bottom, the biggest moves take place right after the bottom. They jump back up, and you're seeing this now with the COVID thing. You know, when we dropped about 20-some%, we've recovered a lot of that, and it's going to bounce back and forth. You know, so what I would suggest is that when things go crazy, if you have access to looking at a longer-term trend for the stock market, see where we're at. When I saw this happen and we went down to 20% below, I looked at the 5-year trend. And if the 5-year trend gets to the point where it's near zero, then you know people are going to invest like crazy because it's going to continue to go up from that point. But I mean, these are things that we could talk about a lot separately, but the bottom line is I would suggest not getting out if you're broadly represented in the stock market. So, and to be honest with you, in 2008 and 9, when so many people got out, they talk about this wealth gap now that became great. And the wealth gap became great because of those people that didn't go out of their IRAs and all their 401ks and all that stuff, who didn't bail out completely, were able to see the benefit of the growth that took place afterwards. And those that stayed out and tried to get back in late just never recovered. So that was the longer answer.
Thank you both. And thank you, Juliet, for the question. Next up, we have a question from Valerie. Aside from paying off a mortgage as soon as possible, any advice for first-time home buyers in the current market?
I'll speak to that real quick. The plan that I ascribe to is Dave Ramsey, and he would recommend a 15-year fixed rate mortgage where the payment is no greater than 25% of your take-home pay. So that's significantly less house than what you can qualify for. And it's just a more conservative approach, and you'll pay it back faster, and you'll spend less money in interest over the course of, over the life of that loan. And you'll put yourself in a situation where you would be able to make more than the minimum payment consistently over that 15-year period, and get it paid off earlier and own that home sooner.
Yeah. And looking at it from the longer run, like early on, they used to give you the advice, buy as much home as you can because it'll continue to go up. But that game has changed over the years. And I would say, Zach's 25% rule is a really good one. You don't want to get yourself to where you're house poor and you can't live your life, because I don't think the housing market is going to ramp up like it did back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think interest rates right now are going to remain low for a while till we recover from all this, and that'll drive the price of houses up because people are going to be able to get mortgages at a low rate and their monthly payment will be attractive. But I wouldn't let that tempt me to get way more house than you really need, because you still have to live your life, and you also have to put that reserve away for later on.
Thank you. Thank you, Valerie, for your question. Next question, where have you found the best place to invest, such as a 401k, IRA?
Well, I don't know if Zach, you want to answer that, or I could answer it. But what I found is that, especially these days, the less knowledge you have on individual stocks, exchange traded funds are the best way to go that broadly cover the market. And the ones with the lowest management fees are the ones you want to go after. There again, we could spend a lot of time talking on that, but the less you know about the stock market and individual stocks, the better off you are just mimicking the stock market, because professional investors, by and large, do not beat the market itself. They tend to underperform the market. So if you're not familiar with exchange traded funds and so forth, we could have a separate discussion or whatever about that, but that's what I would recommend to people today. I don't know what your thoughts are, Zach.
I'm not at that step yet. So I'm still in baby step 2, working my debt snowball, getting out of debt. I would be much more well-versed in answering that question in a few years, hopefully.
Yeah. And that's where basically that's what I have to live off of now. So,
I can address the next question though, which is if anyone's interested in taking the Dave Ramsey's course, it's called Financial Peace University. I teach it at my church. We go through the course once a year. In February, typically we'll get started with that. But you can go to Dave Ramsey's website or financialpeaceuniversity.com, and you can check out other courses that are being offered in the area. And you can even take the home study course and do it from the comfort of your own home. I'd recommend a live group, because I think there's a real benefit to hearing other people's experiences and their journey, and just having that community around you to work through that aspect of your life.
Thank you. And thank you, Rachel, for your question. I have a quick question real quick. If someone does have multiple student loans, do you suggest consolidating them?
Well, ultimately, it's more important to come up with a plan for paying it back. Now, if there's a significant interest rate difference, it may be beneficial, but it's not a generalization. It really would matter specifics. You have a 9% fixed rate student loan, and you want to consider refinancing that loan to a 4% interest rate. That very well, and it's a large loan, $25,000 loan. That really may be worth something pursuing. But if it's not a drastic enough difference, if it's pretty close as far as the interest rate and the amount of time that you're going to be paying that loan back, it may be it may not be beneficial to refinance it, because there are typically some sort of a fee involved in refinancing. So it's something you really need to research and look at specifically. I'd be happy to sit down with you and discuss that further, more specific to your situation.
And that's good advice, Zach. Another trick you can use is by taking your existing loans and paying against the principal. And what you can do is, let's say, I did this with some apartments. I owned a dozen apartments over this previous 10-year period, and the original interest rate was like 7.5%. And then we had the financial crisis take place back in 2008 and 9. And I didn't want to go through the refinancing process, but what I did is I had some money, some cash coming available. And I didn't know about Dave Ramsey at the time, but I paid like crazy against the principal of the loan to take it from 7.5% to down to like the equivalent of about 4% without refinancing anything. And then I drove the amount I owed down quite a bit. And so, for example, when you're paying 7.5% interest on, let's say, $500,000 versus 7.5% interest on $200,000, it's a hugely smaller number. Even though my monthly payment was the same, that monthly payment was driving down the interest rate. So there's some tricks you can use, some ways to sort of gain the loan, if you will.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple questions left. Does anybody else on the line have a question they want to ask really quick?
Yeah. At what point do you think it would be worth like looking into talking to a financial planner? I mean, I see my parents who are working with theirs as they're coming up on retirement, and I think, I don't really have a lot right now. So is it worth it at this point in life, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's never too early to start having those conversations and start interviewing that important advisor in your life, that trusted partner that you're going to have, who's going to be, encouraging you not to jump out of the market when it's at the bottom, and helping you navigate and make decisions about where and how you're going to invest money. I think interviewing that person now is a great idea.
When you say interviewing, what are some good things to look for?
I would say the heart of a teacher. One of the things that I mentioned is that you never want to invest in something that you really don't understand. So finding an advisor who is willing to take that extra time with you and give you some more solid substance as to that whole conversation, and has that heart of a teacher.
There's another piece of that, and this is maybe a little more hard-boiled because I've been through a few financial advisors. Find out what their incentive is for making money, for them making money. Is it at your expense, or are they paid a general salary? Because if you get a financial advisor like a legitimate one where you're paying for service, they usually require you to have a certain amount invested, and that certain amount could be as high as $500,000. And then they want 1% of that money every year to give you advice. And when you're talking that, they're taking 1% of that $500,000 from you every year. So that means you have to be beating their investment fee every year for it to make it worth your while to use these people. I would say trying to understand investments and study it a little bit before you get deeply involved with an advisor. And there are a lot of ways you can do it with less than, with smaller amounts of money. But usually if you're getting an individual one-on-one custom service thing, those are the kind of numbers you're talking. Roughly, $250,000, $500,000, and 1% to 2% management fees, which is pretty hefty to me, That's why I go back to these exchange traded funds. If you have ones that can track the market, and you look at something like, I don't know if you've ever heard of something called Morningstar. Morningstar is like a financial services organization that rates all these things. And you can go to Morningstar and learn a lot about investing and a lot about how the different investment vehicles are managed and how much the costs are and so forth. But an education early is really important. And Zach, you were talking about it. You can either have a trusted person do it, and they'll do it for a fee, or you can try to learn as much as you can by, taking some courses in it and that sort of thing. But it's really worthwhile. It really is to get an education in it. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have another question from Julia. What do you think of people who budget by writing down every little thing they buy every day? Is this a good tactic, or do you think it's too extreme?
Frank, do you want to answer first, or?
Yeah, I think it's too extreme. And the reason I say that is you're going to vary. You could keep track of it every day, but it's sort of like you'll eventually wear yourself out doing it. You want to make it so that it's not an exact science, and a lot of times, sometimes you can manage within your budget a month, but outside of it another month. But the main thing is you're trying to control your expenses to where you're living below what your income is. That's really the punchline on the whole thing. And I mean, there's nothing wrong in trying to do it, but I think if you're doing it for 30 or 40 years, you'll wear yourself out. It's sort of like exercising, like if you exercise and you're exercising to get at your peak fitness, you're going to eventually burn yourself out and never want to exercise again. But if you're exercising for your whole life, 2 or 3 times a week, probably okay,
So I have a slightly different perspective than Frank on this particular issue. I use an app called Every Dollar. It's a free app on my phone, and my wife and I both input things into the app when we make a purchase. It's very convenient, very easy. If we aren't able to put it in the phone at that moment, which most of the time we aren't, we grab a receipt, shove it in our pocket, and when we get a couple of minutes, we record that purchase. And it categorizes the purchase and puts it in all of our categories are laid out in that budget, that electronic budget. And I can tell you to the penny what we paid for groceries last month and last month a year ago. And it's not burdensome to me or my wife, but that may not fit everybody's lifestyle as well. So I don't think that there's a right or a wrong answer necessarily, but there is a right or wrong answer for you. You have to do what works for you. And if it's part of your plan to keep record of how much you're spending in this area and how much you can cut in an area and how much you can splurge in an area of your budget, I think it's important. And there are ways to do that in a way that's not that is convenient and isn't difficult.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Zach. And by saying that, we use Quicken all the time, so I can track just about everything in every category. I guess where I was going with that is, like for cash expense, we'll allow a certain amount of cash expense in a month. And we use our credit cards to keep track and then download into Quicken. So we can keep track of dining, utilities, car expenses, gas, all that stuff. And we do that and we track it all. What I'm talking about was more let's say you allow yourself maybe $200. So if you get a cup of coffee somewhere, it's within the $200, and maybe you keep $200 or $100 available for those expenses that you don't exceed, in a month.
Pocket money.
Pocket money, yeah. Or we use, yeah. That's what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying don't keep track of your overall expenses, but if you get into micromanaging too much and you beat yourself over the head for spending $3 more on groceries one month, well, you just sort of underspend somewhere else, but you always go back every month and recalibrate yourself to where you're at.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Juliet, for your question. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, we have a couple more. When saving for retirement, when should we focus on saving a certain amount by a certain age? So for example, by the time I'm 30, should I save X amount? By the time I'm 50, should I save X amount?
Well, what I can say is that probably the most important thing is understanding the cost of your lifestyle. And it'll take you a couple years to do that. And that's where this budget that Zach was talking about and I was talking about, if you say to yourself, I spend year in and year out this much money on myself, and this is, when I did my little presentation, I said, how much is enough? If you live at the level where you say, this is enough for me to live, that's your bench, that's your starting point. That number tells you if you live the same lifestyle later in life, you're going to need that much money per year to live. And usually later on, it's a little bit less than that because other expenses start to drop off. Like if you have kids and mortgages and things like that, that lifestyle number in midlife is about 70 or 80% when you retire, roughly. So you can run those kind of calculations, and once you know that number, you'll know how much money you have to live with, and then you decide in your mind how long can you live with that amount of income, and then that lets you know how much total you have to have, and you can work the numbers backwards from there to how much you have to have by a certain age. And the funny thing is, people think they have to make more money, but it's really you have to spend less money, because it's what the secret of all this is if you spend $10, you have to make $15 to make it up. Because for a $10 expense, you have to make $15, and the government will take 15 or 20%, and there'll be other taxes and so forth. So for every dollar you spend, you have to make $1.50, sometimes up to $2, depending on where your income is. So it's really more knowing yourself and knowing what your ongoing expenses are that's the most important thing. And then once you know that, then you can back into those numbers. What do I need to save by age 30, 40, 50, and whatever. My goal from the very beginning was to try to get to a point where if I chose to do it, I could retire at age 50. And what that meant is every year that I got a raise, part of the raise went towards paying off the mortgage, part of the raise went towards retirement income, and a small part of it went towards lifestyle change. And we were able to do that, but it takes, you don't want to get used to things. Like, have you ever heard the expression, a luxury once acquired becomes a necessity? What that means is, like, garage door openers. When I was a kid, nobody had a garage door opener. You just opened a garage well, no one had a garage either, but once we got garages, you had to open the garage door yourself and close it. Then later on, when people had garage door openers, if it was broken, it was a panic in the house because nobody could get out. And then you had to remember and say, wait a minute, we used to be able to open the garage door. And that's why I'm saying that once you acquire that luxury, you get used to that part of being your lifestyle. And what you want to do is avoid things becoming part of a lifestyle that you don't really need. And that's that how much is enough question. So hopefully it wasn't too abstract.
Just a quick resource for you if you're asking that question for yourself is a website, chrishogan360.com. There's something on there called the RIQ, the Retirement Investment Quotient. It takes you through a series of questions, and you input some hard data, and it computes, what that big number would look like that would be enough for you to retire on, and it breaks it back down into what you would need to invest on a monthly basis in order to hit that big number. So that's a really good resource to check out.
Can you repeat that?
Chris Hogan 360, the digits 360.com.
And an additional one that I personally use is, and I don't know how many other people in this group would use it, but Quicken. Quicken is a really great resource for doing that long-term planning and budgeting, and then you can automatically download things from all the different agencies you work with, banks and investment firms and whatever. And I found that to be a really nice resource. And I've used it for probably 25 years, something like that.
Awesome, thank you. Brian, you had a question. Any tips on avoiding lifestyle creep? Can you elaborate on that?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello?
Yes. The question was lifestyle creep. Like when you start the more you make, the as you said earlier, the necessity, the luxuries start seeming like necessities. And the thing is that, I mean, I get the numbers. I mean, everything makes sense on paper and all that. But do you have any tips on the how to develop the mental fortitude that necessary to adhere to these type of budgets? Is there like give yourself a present every now and again, take the girlfriend or wife out to dinner, but budget that in there effectively. Like, how is, like, because I mean, yeah, it all sounds good on paper, but I mean, even the strongest, one of us would just, crack after a while.
Yeah, I think if you, and I think you've probably hit on one of the key things, develop that little reward. Let's say if you reach usually the stuff that's the big deal doesn't come off as a big deal. Like if you get a big present at Christmas, you're all excited for a day. If you pay off your mortgage, it's like, it's not exciting to be paying off your mortgage for all those years. But if you reach a point where you pay off, if you're working towards paying off your mortgage and you reach a milestone on it, do a little reward thing for yourself. Create that little incentive, for you to get there. And I think that'll help you develop that longer term perspective on things. But it's very rewarding when you get to the point, like right now, I'm at the point where we've pretty much got ourselves to the point where I'm it's hard to say for sure with the way the world goes, but that our needs will be taken care of. So what I'm able to look at now is what Zach was talking about earlier. I'm looking at, I would love to establish a scholarship fund later on in my life. And I think I can do it, but part of being able to do it is by not spending it all myself, And so the reward of doing that and leaving a legacy becomes, starts to take on a life of its own, and that's the reward.
I love the question because it uncovers a big misconception about the budget. The budget is not that I can't spend money on X, Y, Z. The budget is giving you permission to spend money on X, Y, Z. It's just you being intentional and making that decision beforehand in a logical way, and sitting down and running the numbers and saying, I have this amount of money, I have to meet these needs, and I have these wants, and I'm going to be intentional about setting aside money for these things. My wife and I have a category for restaurants. We have a category for entertainment, for pocket money, for travel. So we set money aside for those things, and when it's time to spend the money, it's a joy because we have that money earmarked for that category. We don't have to worry about, am I going to be able to pay the electric bill? We know that that's already worked into the budget, and that this money that we have set aside for vacation, we can spend every last penny of it on vacation, and it will not in any way hurt all these other important needs and responsibilities that we have when we get home.
Yeah, that's really well said, Zach. And that's that whole delayed gratification thing.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the question, Ryan. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, Zach or Frank, do you have any ending comments, anything else that you thought would be needed?
I think
any last comments?
Yeah, I think we covered most of the territory. There were some really good questions, and I think for everyone here, when you're early on in the game, don't look at this like a budget or as a nuisance or evil or anything. This is where you're taking your life's energy and deciding what to do with it. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of power in money only because of the exchange value and what you can do with it. And make those choices, and I think you'll be really happy and surprised with what you come up with.
I'd just like to say, I'm sure Frank, I'll speak for Frank and say that, we're open. If you guys have questions, or if you need help with something, we're open to chat with you about it. If you have other questions that come up after the fact, and your journey starts here. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And if there's a need for a follow-up with something of more detail or something a little different on this, I'd be glad to do that too. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Frank. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. So if there's no other comments or questions, we can close this